William Randolph Hearst, maybe you know that name, one of the richest men in America in the 20th century. Here's a picture of him up on the screens. William Randolph Hearst. By 1930, Hearst owned over 40 major newspapers in America. He had all kinds of disposable income. So among other things, Hearst began a world-class art collection. There was any number of paintings in his collection. And finally, one day, Hearst said that he specifically needed one piece of art, just an exquisite piece of art, that would complete his collection. So Hearst set an agent to look for this priceless painting. The agent looked high and low, far and wide, near and far. This agent looked all over the world for this prized, priceless painting. Couldn't find it. Looked everywhere, all the art markets, couldn't find it. And so William Randolph Hearst became livid. Said, I have to have that painting. If you don't find that painting within the next 24 hours, you're fired. This agent began a scramble. We can only imagine. Finally, he found it just in the nick of time. He found the painting. And where did he find the painting at? In the warehouse of William Randolph Hearst. That ever happened to you? You're scrambling to find something, and it's right in front of you. Your car keys, your checkbook, your iPhone, your tax documents. You and I have a much greater treasure that God has given us in the resurrection of Jesus. And so often, if you are like me, this treasure gets lost in the warehouses of life. In all the chaos and clutter, you lose sight of this great treasure called God's power. And so you walk around defeated and depressed, weak and weary. What does Paul have to say about that? That's the question we're asking during this joyful Easter season as we work our way through Paul's letter called Ephesians. Under this theme, who does God say we are? See, God is all about changing our identities. Did you know that? From weak and weary, down and depressed to empowered, that's who God says we are. God loves to change people's identities. Remember Abram in Genesis? Abram means exalted father, but God changed his identity to Abraham, father of many. He did the same thing with Jacob. Jacob means trickster, liar, deceiver, conniver, slanderer. Jacob got a new identity called Israel, which means let God rule. And then there's Simon Bar-Jonah, and he got a new identity too, didn't he? Your name no longer will be called Simon Bar-Jonah, but Petros, Peter, rock. On this rock I'll build my church. Our God specializes in taking lame identities that we have and changing those into God-given glorious identities. Who does God say we are today? The second half of Ephesians chapter 1, God says we are empowered. Do you believe that? Well, let's see what Paul has to say. We begin the second half of Ephesians 1. Paul says, see the power. See the power. There are two prayers in Ephesians. One at the end of chapter 3, and then this one midway in chapter 1. In this prayer, Paul prays for the people to see the power. See, you can have the power, right? It's in your warehouse. It's somewhere, but we just don't see it. This is his prayer. I pray also that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, in order that you may know the hope to which he's called you, the glorious riches of his inheritance in the saints, and his incomparably great power. There it is. For us who believe. Power. That's a key word in Ephesians. It comes 5 times in these 6 chapters. And many of you know that the Greek word behind this English word translated power is right up there on the screen for you. It's dynamis. Dynamis. You don't have to be a linguistic scholar to understand that from dynamis in Greek we get what English word? Dynamite. Dynamite. This power, Paul wants us to see, is likened to an explosive that destroys demons, devils, darkness, and yes, death. It is dynamite. You can have the dynamite. Right there. It's right there. But you fail to see the dynamite. That's why Paul says, I pray for the eyes of your heart to be enlightened. Our spiritual eyes quite often are out of focus or they're just flat out blind. Many of you know I wear contact lenses. My vision, uncorrected vision, is 2400. Have you ever seen that E on the eye chart? Just raise your hand if you've seen that E. Good for you. I haven't. I've never seen it. Folks, when you're 2400, you don't see the I on the eye chart. You don't see the E either. You don't see any letters. When your eyesight is 2400, you wear contact lenses because there are no good-looking glasses. The lenses are about that thick. Let's be honest. All of us have a problem with spiritual eyesight. You with me here? See, we don't see the GP on the eye charts. It's always kind of fuzzy, right? What's GP? God's power. We just don't see it. And so sometimes we're spiritually farsighted. Spiritually farsighted. That is to say, we can see things far away. If you're farsighted, you can see things far away. So spiritually farsighted, we say, I'm not worried about the future at all. God has a glorious plan. In fact, Jesus has destroyed death and the grave. I'm not worried about the future at all. But you know what? I don't see very well up close. And so today, I came to church. I'm a mess. I got babies and bills and bottles and bickering, and then there are all of these roadblocks in life. And I am having my 19th nervous breakdown because I don't think God has any power for today. If he does, it's one poor eensy-beensy little firecracker. Spiritual farsightedness. You see in the future, fine. Today, you say, there's no power at all. Some of you, that's not your problem. You have spiritual, not farsightedness, but nearsightedness. So you can see near, right? That's me. I can see near, all right? So today, hey, it's great. It's spring in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The blossoms are blooming, right? Today's a great day. You're not concerned about today. It's the future you can't see very well. So when blank happens, just fill in the blank. When all my children are gone and I have that empty nest hole in my heart, God won't have power there. When I retire, when I get my first call, Christopher Harrison and Michelle, right? Next week, right? When I go to that doctor's appointment, a lot of times we have a problem trusting God for the future. And we say, poor God. I can see what's going on today, that's fine. But in the future, poor God, just one of those eensy-beensy little firecrackers. There's no dynamite. There's no power for my future. I'm sunk. When you and I don't have the eyes of our heart enlightened, we're a lot like a man who thought he was chicken feed Really, this is a true story. He thought he was chicken feed. Talk about an identity crisis. So he went into a counselor. And he said, you know, when you think you're chicken feed, you are chicken of the chickens. You with me here? And so after years, the counselor finally convinced this man, you're not chicken feed. You're not chicken. You're a real deal here. You're a real person. So he felt like he was born again. Several weeks later, some new neighbors moved in. And the guy ran back to his counselor and said, help, you got to help me out. The counselor said, wait, I thought we had convinced you that you weren't chicken feed. The guy said, I know. But these neighbors of mine have chickens. You know I'm not chicken feed. I know I'm not chicken feed. But do these chickens next door know I'm not chicken feed? He was chicken of the chickens. Is that you? It is if the eyes of your heart are not enlightened. There's a beautiful, remarkable story in 2 Kings chapter 6, where one of Elisha's attendants and servants is sitting on a hill, and he sees all of these invading enemies. And that's all he can see. All he can see would be the enemies, much like us, all the circumstances, all the people, all the folks that drain our lives. All he can see is that. And so then Elisha prays for this guy's eyes. And here are the verses. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed just as Paul prays for us in Ephesians 1. Oh Lord, open his eyes so he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked, and he saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around the prophet Elisha. Circle that phrase, horses and chariots. In the Old Testament, if you want to talk about dynamite, if you want to talk about the power of God, you would use what expression? Horses and chariots. That's what surrounds the people. Oh God, open our eyes that we might see. There are more with us than are with them. Paul classically puts it this way in Romans 8:31. If God is for us, who can be against us? See the power. See the power. See the dynamite. It's not a little firecracker. It's what kind of power? Paul says it is awesome power. So we see it and we believe it. Believe it. He goes on in this prayer and defines the power, the dynamite that we're talking about. He says this power is like the working of his mighty strength, which he exerted in Christ when he raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms. This is, you guessed it, resurrection power. The power to raise people from the dead. Now, we have some options here I want us to explore when it comes to the claims of the Christian church, that Jesus actually was dead and now he's alive. So let's take a look at them. There are at least 6 options. Perhaps the first one you've thought about, the disciples lied. Because dead people don't rise. This has to be a lie. If it is a lie, this is the greatest lie ever foisted upon the human race. If it was a lie, just think through this with me. If the disciples lied, they would want to make this as convincing as possible. You with me here? When you and I lie, we want it to look really good, right? You kind of doctor up the lie so it looks really good. Well, we would imagine the disciples would do the same thing too. Who were the first people at the empty tomb? You know that. Women. Why is that important? Because in Jewish and Greco-Roman society of the first century AD, the testimony of women was considered what? Worthless. So if you're concocting a lie, you wouldn't have women there, right? You'd have who? The men. But the fact that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all tell us that women were the first eyewitnesses of the resurrection gives the resurrection more credibility. Did the disciples lie? Do you think all 11 disciples died as martyrs for a lie? For something they concocted? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. So let's scratch that one off the list. Another option. The disciples hallucinated. Again, a lot of people believe this. They just hallucinated. They got caught up in the moment. Dead people don't rise, but they thought they kind of saw Jesus. You know what Paul says to that? In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the great resurrection chapter of the Bible. Paul says, 1 Corinthians 15:6, that at one time, during the 40 days Jesus showed himself alive, at one time, 500 people saw Jesus. So Paul's argument in 1 Corinthians 15:6 is, you don't believe me, you don't believe the disciples, you think they hallucinated, then go to Jerusalem and find one of those 500 people. And they'll tell you what happened. No, you scratch that off the list. The women went to the wrong tomb. Well, maybe that's possible. I've made wrong turns before. Perhaps you have too, right? They just went to the wrong tomb. Is that viable? If that's all that happened, then all the Jewish authorities had to do was show the dead body of Jesus. You know what? They couldn't show the dead body of Jesus. So scratch that one off the list. Well, a lot of people, this fourth one is called the swoon theory. Christ didn't die. He didn't die. Because again, the idea is dead people don't get up. So he really didn't die. He just kind of convinced the disciples that he had. And then on the third day, he was a fake and a fraud. Is that true? Do you know between 69 BC, that's when Pompey, a Roman emperor, entered Jerusalem, and 70 AD, that's when the Romans destroyed the Second Temple. So during Roman occupation, from 69 BC to 70 AD, how many Jews did the Romans crucify? You know what historians tell us? About 350,000. Did the Romans know what they were doing when they stuck people on wood? You bet they did. They had it down to a science. That Jesus didn't really die is saying the Romans didn't know what they were doing. And besides, most victims would last about 72 hours on the cross. 72 hours. That was the average. How long did Jesus last? 6. What's that tell you? They almost killed him when they beat him at a place called Gabbatha. It is beyond imagination that Jesus really didn't die. No, he was dead. He was dead. Well, here's one, really the most famous one today. First century people were less sophisticated, right? They were more gullible. We lived after the Enlightenment. We're much more sophisticated. These first century simpletons, they just believed everything. Really? Did you know that the idea of an individual raising from the dead is not found in any dominant worldview in the first century? No one believed this, folks. The Romans and Greeks didn't. Paul went to Athens, the intellectual center of his day. You can read about it in Acts 17. And he preached the resurrection, and what did they say? Oh, well, of course, sure. No, they didn't say that at all. They laughed Paul out of town. Dead people don't rise. And the Jews, the Jewish Sadducees, the ruling elders, the spiritual elite of the day, did they believe in the resurrection? Not on your life. You can check that out in Matthew chapter 22. No, that doesn't bear the weight either. Scratch that one off the list. You know what we're left with? The best documented event in antiquity. And what would that be? Christ bodily rose from the dead. Why is that adverb bodily important? Because a lot of people think, oh yeah, Jesus is alive. But he lives in the life of the church. He lives in our hearts. He lives in our memories. No. If you believe that, you missed the boat. Bodily rose from the dead. That's the power we're talking about. That's the power that exploded the seal on the tomb and rose Jesus bodily on the third day. If you're on the fence, it's time to get off, folks. It's the real deal. So we see the power. We believe the power. Paul concludes Ephesians 1 with this idea. Use the power. Use it. He says, God placed all things, that is Jesus, under his feet and appointed him to be head over all things, everything, for the church, for you. Use the power. I've been in Indiana just long enough to have heard several jokes about people in Kentucky. There's this animosity between people in Indiana and Kentucky. People in Indiana think a little bit more sophisticated, right? Am I true? Yeah, everybody's, yeah, of course. Yeah, Kentucky. What good comes out of Kentucky? Well, there was a woman several years ago who lived in let's just say, the backwoods of our neighboring state. And she said it was finally time to get electricity hooked up. You understand, people in Kentucky, about half have electricity, half don't. You're with me, all right? And so she got electricity hooked up. It was worth the time, the effort, and the money. After several months, though, the company saw where she wasn't using hardly any electrical power. So they sent someone out there to figure out, is everything okay? What's wrong? And she said, oh no, we're very satisfied. We love our electricity. You know what? We turn it on every night so we can see to light our candles. She saw the power. She believed the power. She just didn't use the power. Aren't you tired of that? Fumbling around in the darkness for your cruddy little candles. Feeling as though you are without hope and without power. Feeling as though these circumstances in life are just going to crush you. Let me summarize the second half of Ephesians 1 with just 4 words. 4 words. This is what Paul is saying. This is the challenge for the pastor and the parishioners today. 4 words. You ready? Plug into the power. That's it. It's really simple, finally. The dynamis of God, the dynamite of God, Paul says, enough is enough. Plug into the power. One way to do that is to sing, all hail the power of Jesus' name. So why don't we do that?